Okay, and we are live and recording this session. Hello and welcome to today's webinar presentation entitled Managing Source Terminology, even if you don't translate. We have with us, and I'm very excited to introduce Val Swisher. Val is the CEO of Content Rules. And Val, I'm going to let you quickly introduce yourself right now before we get to David. Val.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, David, for having me on your show today. So yeah, I'm Val Swisher. I am the founder and CEO of Content Rules. We are a full-service content development and strategy agency. We have a specialty area of taking English source content and preparing it for translation. We call that our Global Readiness Service, and we work a lot with source terminology, both for our customers who do translate, and then also with optimizing customers' content, even if they don't translate, which is the topic of today's webinar.
Awesome, great. David, you're the Director of Strategic Operations at Net-Translators. If you want to quickly introduce yourself.
Well, I don't have to now that you've introduced me, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank my good friend Val for agreeing to do this webinar. If you recall, Chris, you and I had spoken. We said, let's brainstorm, see what our next really hot webinar is going to be. And I said, hey, let's bring Val aboard, see if she'll agree. And Val, thanks a lot. I appreciate this. This is it's tremendous, and I'm really happy that you've taken me up on my offer.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Great. And we lots of interest in this session. I think we have over 250 people signed up. Val, if you want to go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
All right, David, if you want to quickly.
All right. Yeah. So since we're not really talking too much about localization, because I wanted to make sure that this webinar would be relevant for you guys, even if you don't localize. So I usually have a quote by George Carlin that meow is woof in dog, but I sort of said, oh, that's not really appropriate because woof is just another term. So let's look at how many terms that we can have for what a dog uses to express himself. And I came up with this pile of different terms, and Val's going to explain what all these terms are for us.
All right.
I'm going to fully define woof and growl and bark and yip.
All right, let's get this started.
All righty. So thanks, everyone. And as Chris said, I'm going to try to save some time at the end for questions, so please feel free to formulate some and let us know what they are. I'm going to be talking about three different things today, taking the topic of terminology management and really dividing it into three things. First of all, what is it? What does it mean to manage terminology? The second is, why do you care? Why should you do that? Particularly if you're not translating, right? Is it really important? And then the third is, well, okay, let's agree it's important now. How do you do it? But before we start, Chris, could you do our very first poll, which has to do with getting an idea from our audience of your experience with terminology management?
Yeah, and we'll probably leave it up for maybe another 20 seconds or so. So basically, if you can rate, give us an idea, what's your experience with terminology management? And I already see a trend here. I'll be sharing the result just in a second. So maybe another 5 seconds if you want to cast your vote, please. We'll do 3, 2, and people are still voting here. People are still putting in their votes. Let's give it another 2.
All counts. All votes counts.
All right, there we go. Let me close the poll here, and then Val, are you surprised? Some comments.
So I actually can't see it, so you have to tell me what it says.
That's right. So we have 34%, I'm new to terminology management. We have 54%, I have some experience with terminology management. 9%, I'm a terminology management pro, and 3% not sure.
Okay, all right. No, I am not surprised at all. I think it's extremely common, and let's see if we can get everybody up to a level where we at least understand what it is and why we care and how we might go about doing it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So at the very basic level, terminology management controls how words are used. It controls what words you're going to use, and it controls how you're going to use those words. And we really need to start with what is a term. And David already pointed out a couple of days ago to me that I sort of have a mistake on this slide. I say a term is a word that has a specific legal meaning or ramification for its use, or it's something that you made up, but you're using it like everybody knows what you're talking about, or it has a specific usage that you want to enforce. Now, the bullets are accurate. What's not accurate is that a term is not necessarily a single word. Sometimes a term is multiple words, and they're used together. And together, they have a legal meaning. Maybe it's a trademark, a service mark, or you made it up. I think every day we make up more words. Or you're using a word in a specific way. So let's look a little deeper. For example, I like some of these because not only are they legal terms, but they're legal terms that we made up. So Google, which now has become a verb. So when your company name becomes a verb, you know you've made it, right? I Google this, I FedEx that. At the moment, we don't content rules anything, but that is a legal term. It is a registered trademark. And of course, if you have a product name like the Acme Model 2701 blender, legal terms are terms that you want to think about managing and really have a plan for. Here's some words that we've made up as time has gone on, and some of them have become so infiltrated into our lexicon that we don't even realize that they're not actually words. So home shoring, future-proof, daughter card, gamification. We could probably come up with dozens and dozens of words that we've made up. It's important that we spend a little bit of time focusing on managing these words because they aren't in the dictionary and people may not know what they mean and they may not know how to use them properly. And then, of course, we have this issue of standardizing terms. This is my favorite example. What on earth do you do with this little button? And this is an example where the term is actually more than one word. There are over 50 ways to describe the action that you take with this button. You can click OK, select OK, press OK, tap OK, click the OK button, select the OK button, press the OK button, tap the OK button, click on the button. You know, I mean, there's 50 some odd ways. Even if you're not translating, for readability and clarity, you want to pick one and use it forever in everything that you do. These days, given the different physical things we can do with a button, whether we click or press or tap, my personal favorite is click OK. Short, sweet, to the point, works in pretty much every circumstance, no matter how you select it. But the bottom line is standardize. It's going to make things easier for everybody. We also have standards of terminology. And David, did you want to point out what some of these are? I'm glad that these were added.
Yeah, well, I threw those in because there are references that that the people on the webinar can go to and look at for how ISO standards address terminology. And these are just four of the standards. I don't want to say that they're the main standards, but these are the four standards that we've looked at most extensively. And essentially, they break down not just how you're describing it, but they also break down terminology in terms of concept-based terminology or phrase-based terminology, and so on. And they also call for some minimal standards for inclusion in the terminology. I'll try to point that out a little bit later as we go along. If just to make when we come to the appropriate slide, I'll just mention the minimum standards that the ISO, specifically ISO 860, I believe it is, calls for managing terminology.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So bottom line, a term is a word or a set of words that you care about. And you can't care about the entire dictionary, but you need to focus on certain words. Okay, Chris, you want to do our second poll?
Sounds good. So we'd like to know, do you actually translate your content? So we'll give us an idea how many people primarily just deal with the management of terminology, or if you actually translate your content, which then managing the terminology is a whole different animal. And so definitely, wow, already see a trend. Looks like most of you are actually translating your content. And I'll share the results in, why don't we do another 3 seconds here.
Chris,
yeah.
That really is not surprising, because I think that one of the reasons we wanted to discuss terminology, even if you don't translate, is because the people people feel the most pain about terminology when they start to translate. They find that the inconsistencies, while they may have been okay in English, they suddenly become much more painful for different languages, and the ambiguities are probably the source of a lot of this of the pain. So it's not surprising that people who have experience with terminology management are also going to be the ones who have experience translating.
Absolutely, and yeah, 73% actually translate the content.
All right.
That's it. Val, I'm handing you over back to you.
Great. Okay, great. Well, that does mean that 27%, a quarter of the people who are on the call today, do not. And there are still many really important reasons to manage your terminology, even if you're not translating, though I could not agree more with David that if you are, the pain just starts to exponentiate with every language that you add. So these are some of the many reasons that you want to really care about your terminology, even if you're not translating. If you focus on your terminology and you manage it properly, you're going to really increase the readability of your content. You're going to make it clean, you're going to make it clear. Your readers, your customers will always know what you're talking about if you're consistent with your word usage. You use those words the same way to mean the same thing. You don't go switching words around on people. I can tell you that if you're not translating, then you have a lot of people reading your content who have English as a second language. So for ESL readers, again, really standardizing your terminology, using it the same way each time, really having it worked out is going to help them tremendously. Of course, it increases the translatability, it lowers the cost of translation, it makes your translations of a much higher quality. If you're consistent with your words, the 73% of the people on the call who do translate know that. And another reason is that it supports intelligent content, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. If you're moving to an environment, or you're in an environment where you're using structured authoring and you're trying to single source your content, if you're not managing your terminology, it's all going to fall apart, and I will get to that in just a moment. So why is it so difficult? Why is this so tricky? Well, there's really 4 things that happen with terminology that make it a challenge to manage in the source language. Let's not even put all the complications on when you start multilingual terminology management. It's tough to be clear and precise and unambiguous and consistent. It's just difficult. So, for example, being clear, it's sort of like the click OK example. What do you call a box? Do you have a keyboard shortcut or a keyboard accelerator or a hotkey or a hotkey or a hotkey? It's very difficult to be clear about what it is you're talking about. This, I love this thing. This is called a heat-treated aluminum hand bender. I don't know what this means. I don't know if anyone else knows what this means, but this term, heat-treated aluminum hand bender, is what we call a noun cluster. It's too many words all put together. Very difficult for anyone to parse through this and understand what it is and in an unambiguous way. Is it a hand bender that's been heat treated? Is it aluminum? Is it bending my hand? What is this thing doing?
Val, just to point out, I'm an electrician in my past, and that's a pipe bender.
Well, there you go. Right?
Now we have to manage more than one term.
That's right. Oh, yeah. Now you have to manage, when you're managing a noun cluster, it's just bad. Just step away from the keyboard at that point. Precision is difficult in language. It's always difficult in language. So making sure that you can pick the exact words for a term that are precise enough for everybody to understand what it is you're trying to say each and every time, tricky. It's tricky. And of course, consistency. Is it a wave? Is it a wave? Is it a wave? Am I waving my hand? Am I talking about an ocean wave? How can I use my terms in a consistent manner so that people always know what it is I'm talking about? It's difficult to deal with terminology. It really is. So here's a few examples that sometimes we're just using the wrong term. It's just the wrong word. There are less screws for this chassis. That's just the wrong word. Sometimes, a lot of the time, we have trademark issues. Is it an Acme pop-up toaster, an Acme pop-up toaster, or an Acme pop-up toaster? This is important. This is the kind of thing that makes legal departments slightly apoplectic. If you don't use your own trademarks and service marks consistently with the way you have registered them, then you are then violating your own trademark, which then means that other people can violate your trademark. So you really want to be careful not to violate your own trademarks. Lately, we have a lot of issues that are around corporate brand and voice. How are we working and talking with the customer? Are we saying the customer must, or we recommend that you, or why don't you? So all of this, you really need to decide how you're going to manage your words. And of course, some of this has to do with terminology. Some of this has to do with style and style guide usage, but they go hand in hand. You really can't split them out. And then, of course, just like with ISO, we have different standards that we need to make sure that we use the correct standard, whether if you're an XML, you've got preferred names, data element names, etc. So this is my favorite slide in the deck because it's so cute. How many ways can you say this? How many ways can you say woof and bark and yip and growl? There are lots of ways to talk about what you see on the screen right here. This is my slide to try to explain how terminology and structured content are intertwined. So take a journey with me, if you will. Let's imagine that we work for a company that is creating content about this cute thing that's on the screen right now. And Sam writes a chapter on how to walk the dog. And Sally writes a chapter on how to train your puppy. And George writes a chapter on how to groom your Labrador. And Jeff writes a chapter on how to manage the health of your canine. I'm kind of making this up. So we each have written these different components in a structured writing environment where we're now going to build our deliverable, our final output. It could be a PDF, it could be an ebook, it could be an article, it could be a whole bunch of things, but we're grabbing different pieces of content written by different people who clearly used different terms to mean the same thing. Now we've got this book on care of the something, care of the animal, care of the dog, and as a reader, I'm reading through it and I'm thinking, wow, so is it a dog or a canine? Is that different? Is this only specific to a Labrador? You know, we really need to standardize on what we call this thing. And of course, this is easy because we can look at the picture and we all pretty much can interpret what we're talking about. If you're doing life sciences writing, oh my goodness, it could be life and death. If you're doing any type of technology writing, you know, you're getting calls to your tech support department, or people are getting very angry with you because they can't follow what you're saying. So if you're in a structured environment, you must manage your terminology regardless of if you're translating or not, or you will not be able to build deliverables that make any sense. And that's really important in any language, okay? There's all kinds of problems with managing terminology, as we've said. I mean, this is sort of a terminology life cycle, if you will. I need a term, I request it, I have to check, we vote, we approve it, we translate it. There's all, you know, lather, rinse, repeat. We're changing, we're giving feedback. It's a very complicated process. And the problems arrive at very different places all the way along. So first, just validating terms is problematic. And just making sure that we're arriving at consensus. So are we all in agreement that we're going to call it a dog? Or does, you know, Joe, who happens to be a VP, insist that, no, this is a canine? Okay, well, we need to arrive at this. We need to have a workflow for this process. And far too often, what I see in the field, what I see among customers that I work with and people who I talk to, is, yeah, you know, we kind of think we do need to have some sort of process, but, you know, once every 6 years we update our term list, which happens to be a Microsoft Word table, and we're good. And no, it just doesn't work that way. You really need to have a predetermined workflow so that you know, how are people going to incorporate new terms? How do I suggest a new term? Who's going to decide? Who's going to decide what version of that term we're going to use? You need to have a workflow. The next thing is that terminology is never done. It is the gift that keeps on giving. I have one of the popular blog posts that I've written on this. I actually wrote it, I think it's going on 3 years. Still one of the most read blog posts is terminology is like your laundry, right? You go, you do all your laundry, you got the lights, the darks, you wash, you dry, you fold, you iron, you put it all away, and then you look down at yourself and it's like, oh crap, I have laundry now. I have to wash what I'm wearing again. Same thing with terminology. You are never done. If you're done, your company is done, because you're always innovating, you're buying companies, you're merging with companies, you've got new products coming out, new services coming out, new things to talk about, new ways to talk about them. It's a constant cycle. So you need to have governance, you need to have workflow, you need to have an entire structure for how to do this. All right, Chris.
Here.
You want to do our third poll?
Yes. So how many of you actually use a terminology management system? I'd be interested to see the result. Val, what do you think? I'm going to ask you. What do you think? How many, what percentage of our audience today?
Well, 73% are translating. So my hunch is that the people who are translating are probably using some type of TMS tool. My hunch is that of the 27% who are not translating, we'd be lucky if 3 to 5% are using a tool. So I'll be interested to see the results. Definitely there are companies that translate that do not have a terminology management system. There are plenty of them. So my hunch is it's going to be less than 73%.
All right, so we have yes, actually 29, nearly a third. No, 60, 11% are not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, let me hide that and back to you.
All right. Great. It's not surprising. And in my experience, if you're in the quarter of our attendees who aren't translating, the whole issue of terminology management, it's almost like deer in the headlights, like, oh my goodness, yeah, how are we going to do this? Gee whiz. So let's talk about that. The first thing that you need to do is actually make sure that people in your organization understand the importance of what you're doing. I would say that most organizations have very limited understanding of terminology and why it's a strategic asset and why it's valuable. Most people don't understand that there are legal ramifications. I'm finding more and more that customers are starting to get the fact that if you're not managing your words, that your brand may have identity problems. Okay? That's both in the terms that you use and the way in which you use them, whether it's tone of voice or readability or friendliness. There's all different aspects of it. There's general customer confusion if you don't use the same words the same way. And that, of course, will lead to unhappy customers and increased support calls. And again, if you're in the life sciences sector and you're not managing your terminology, that's a really scary thing for me to see. And I have customers in the life sciences arena who have not managed terminology before and understand now that, oh my goodness, yeah, this is really important. Really important. So the first thing you need to do is start the discussion itself. And you need to decide what scenario, what paradigm do you want in terms of managing terminology? Do you want it to be something where a lot of people can participate and provide feedback? Do you want there to be a very strict approval process, or is there really one person and, he or she says that's it and that's it? We're all going to march to the beat of that drum, or are we going to have a committee? How are we going to request different types of things? How do we request a new term? How do we request to eliminate a term and change it? Right? How much collaboration do you want? Do you want to manage things in a centralized way where everybody gets a say? Do you want your terminology management to grow organically? Or are you going to come in and say, okay, we have a grand scheme, let's put the scheme in place? So these are all things to think about, because your decisions on each one of these will guide you to either different tools or different ways to manage or different things that are more important. It'll help you set precedents for things. So you need to think about this. My experience is that when it comes to terminology, you really can have too many cooks in the kitchen. People get very tied to their words. It's very interesting. I've been through many heated arguments that people have about different terms. There's, for each organization, it's sort of like there's just the right number of people, not too many and not too few. It's hard for me to tell you what it is for your organization. There's a very, very, very large high-tech company that literally has a dozen people on a team, and they vote on terms. So every word or set of words gets a vote by a big group. I have other customers that are equally as large, but it's two people. So, it's really finding what works for you. So David, you want to speak to this a bit? Because I know you wanted to talk about this too.
Right. So as an LSP, we sort of have a unique uh, view into what goes on within a company in terms of the stakeholders and terminology. And it's, the problem that so often we see is that you have different groups working on different parts of the company, not just of the product, but of the company. For instance, you might have your software, you might have marketing material, print material, you might have web material, you might have technical communications, and each group is going about doing what it's doing sort of, with some sort of intuitive approach to how they're treating terminology. The problem comes specifically, or for instance, in terms of the web. You don't want your website to be referring to your product in one way and your technical documentation to be referring to it in a second way, and and developers are rushing ahead and changing the product name in a third path. So we get to see this, and we get to see how companies really struggle with this, and we struggle with it because we're the ones who are doing the translating and getting the feedback from from different parts of the company. So we try to encourage our customers to really work collaboratively and have accessibility to their editors, the engineers, terminologists, the producers, the LSP, the linguists, and so on and so on. Whoever comes into contact with that that term, or how they're describing the product, whether it's the development or the web team, they all need to have accessibility to those terms and be part of the group working on the terms.
Absolutely, absolutely. So here's another piece
right,
that I
so,
think you want.
Right, so this just emphasizes, you might have, marketing referring to, this is just a graphic of what I've just said, if you have your marketing department, your training department, documentation department not collaborating on the terminology, then, and each group knows what they're talking about. I mean, in my industry, in localization, we absolutely all know what a term base is, for instance, and if no one would question that, and I might throw out that word just as I threw it out now, but that's because I know it so much, and your documentation people know it so much, and your training people know it so much, and your marketing know it so much. But they each come from a different background and a different perspective. And marketing really wants to come up with those catchy phrases, whereas development wants to make sure that you understand. And documentation, you'd mentioned life sciences. Documentation is talking about tissue. You want to make sure that it's not a tissue to clean a lens of a microscope, or rather tissue that is human tissue, for instance.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what is a term validation process? Here at Content Rules, a lot of the work that we do with customers focuses on validating terms. And validating terms is really a process where you need to decide which words you're actually going to manage. And this goes back to the beginning of our talk. For sure, you're going to manage your trademarks and your service marks. That's the first set of terms that go on your list of things that you need to manage. And your product names, that's another set. And your made-up words. So there's what I would call a sweet spot, really, which is not translatable, by the way, a sweet spot as to just how many terms is the right number of terms to manage. And let me explain. I have a customer, we were going through this validation process, and they had an acronym that was capital B, lowercase e. That was very important. It was burst efficiency or something. I don't exactly remember the definition, but capital B lowercase e was very important. And they wanted to ensure that any time a writer used that acronym, it was capital B and lowercase e. So they decided to put that into the terminology management system. And you can imagine what happened, because any time the system came across lowercase b, lowercase e, as in the word B, it would say, no, you're not using the correct form of this term. It needs to be capital B, lowercase e. That's called too much of a good thing. That you just completely overdo it. You can get terminology management to the point where you're caring about words that really don't matter. Each company is going to have the real correct number, if you will. Sometimes it takes a while to get there, to really know how many of these words do I care about. I have another customer that's in the finance space, and common words used in unique ways. This customer has a very particular definition of the word default, which is very different than the use of the word default for, say, a hardware company where your piece of gear comes with default settings, or software where you have default settings. So whether you're using a term as a verb or an adjective or a noun, again, you may need to manage different parts of speech in different ways. Okay, so validating terminology can be a long and painful process. So where do you actually get your terms? And this is a question that customers ask me all the time. Often when we first engage and we're looking at content optimization and global readiness and standardizing, they don't know where to go to get the words. And these are the common places. A lot of companies have a style guide, and there'll be a term list in the style guide. And a lot of companies also have glossaries themselves, which may have a term and a definition, and they may have random lists of words. All of these are fine places to find your terminology. The biggest problem with them, of course, is that they have to be kept up to date. And we don't have a poll question that says, when was the last time you updated your terminology list? But my hunch would be, you know, in the 0 to 1 year, sometime in this past year, we actually updated our term list, would be a very low percentage. Most companies take on creating a word list or a glossary or even a style guide. They go through the effort, and then, oh my goodness, they'll update it eventually, rather than constantly keeping it up to date and fresh.
You know, Val, another, from our experience, a really fantastic place to harvest terms is actually from your UI. You know, if you can, you know, extract the resource files, or, you know, however the software is extracted, resource XML or property files, or whatever, you know, whatever formats it's in, you know, that's a really fantastic place to harvest most of your terms, in fact, because, you know, everyone else is essentially writing content around the product, and you know, this obviously only affects companies that have a UI that go with the documentation. But you know, it's going to be much more difficult to change anything in the UI than it is anywhere else. So you know, the UI is going to be a pretty stable place, and even if a term is wrong there, they're going to be very hesitant to re-release it, especially, you know, if there's an installed customer base and the users are used to these terms. It's very difficult to get them to change that. So that's a really good place to start looking at terms.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I agree 100%. So harvesting your terms from your UI, whether it's resource files, or some companies keep UI strings even in an Excel spreadsheet, it's a great place. So harvesting it from existing content, the UI being one of the main places that has existing content, or the content that's already been written. And, you know, to your point, because it's difficult to change your UI once it's been out there, I strongly urge my customers to make sure that we check the UI and we validate the UI strings against the terminology, particularly trademarks and service marks, product names, and words that are made up and used differently, before the product is released, because it's hard to go back and change that. So when I'm working with customers and they're about to ship something new, that is the time to make sure that the source terminology in that UI is accurate, because it's hard to do it later. And you're absolutely right, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. So we've already talked about this at least 17 times. By now, I think if I gave you all a test, you could tell me what words need to be managed. Let me hear it. Trademarks, product names, made-up words, common words used in unique ways, and common words that need to be standardized. You all got that right. So then we have the validation step. And this, the picture here means I have no tool, and this is the dirty, down and dirty way to validate terminology. If you have no term management tool, it is not easy to validate terminology, but it can be done. You want to make sure you have your list of terms in a spreadsheet or a table of some sort. First and foremost, spell check your terminology, and you will find a lot of variants of the same term. You'll find variants with a hyphen, without a hyphen, all different kinds of variants. So let's spell check first for discrepancies. And then based on criteria that you have, validate the rest of the terms that are left now that we've all decided this is the right way to spell it. Remove the invalid terms from the spreadsheet, and then you have to go to your content and check your content against your spreadsheet. Clearly, this is cumbersome, and you have to get real dirty with your terms, but it is possible. So here's a sample spreadsheet that I've seen customers use, where they have the word that you're allowed to use, and then the word you're not allowed to use, and then maybe some notes about how you can use it or how you shouldn't use it or what you should do to make your decisions, etc. And here's one that's filled out a little bit from one of my, not one of my customers, but one of our, where we make up things to show people. So perhaps you're allowed to use the word press, but you're not allowed to use the word hit. We call that a deprecated term. Perhaps you're allowed to use the term default configuration, but we don't want to use factory setting. Maybe we want to use appears dim rather than grayed out. So this is a way that you can manually deal with terminology management. It takes time. It's not something that's fast and simple. Dave, you wanted to talk a little bit about multilingual.
Right. So I do want to leave time for questions at the end. So I'll just have 2 words on this. Often we do have companies that when they come to us for translation, it might be the first time they're translating, and they don't manage terminology on their end, even though they're going global and so on. So we have what you described as a quick and dirty process for extracting terminology, and essentially it consists of reviewing the content, identifying term candidates, adding whatever metadata would be appropriate for them, and having an approval process, sort of an iterative process with the customer for the approval of the monolingual terminology. then we would go ahead and we would translate it, and then we have that same iterative process with the customer to approve the multilingual terminology, and then we convert it to, well, I'll use the word term-based before, and that term base is what essentially allows us to turn a glossary, a monolingual glossary, into a multilingual terminology database. So like I said, I don't want to use up too much time because I do want to leave questions for the end. And if anybody is interested at the end, they can add a question and we'll get back to you all.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. So I think this is this looks like it's output from a multilingual terminology management system, correct?
Yes. So this, without going into too much depth, this is what the what it could look like, that Excel spreadsheet that you were showing. So we essentially take that Excel spreadsheet and we turn it into a multilingual database that integrates with our tools. So every time that a term candidate is identified in the source, it'll pop up and give you the correct term as it appears in the terminology database, and then the translator would know what's the accepted translation. Of course, if you're using the word stack as in protocol stack, it could be that you're using stack as a verb now, and you can decline to use the identified term because it's not correct in the context. But at least you have the wherewithal to be able to enforce that terminology.
Absolutely, and this is one example. There are other tools that look slightly different, but most of them contain the same information, regardless of how they look. So let's talk about validating terminology if you do have a tool. This is the process that we use when we're using a tool. We harvest terms, again, could be from the UI strings, could be from existing content. We aggregate them, we examine them and validate them, we eliminate the words that are no longer terms, and then we upload them into the terminology management system. So here's a sample spreadsheet from one of our term harvests after we've aggregated it. So in this particular example, there are 7 different ways to write sample sheet. And some of them are capitalization issues, and that we can ignore or deal with, but is it sample sheet one word, sample sheet with a capital S in the middle, sample sheet with a hyphen in the middle, sample sheet as 2 words? What is it? Same with bead chip. Is it a bead chip, a bead chip, a bead chip, a bead chip, a bead chip? I think there was also bead hyphen chip. So when we harvest terminology using our tool, we will get all of these different variants. It'll tell us the frequency that each one occurred in what the content we harvested it from. Could be the UI strings, could be content. And then it'll also give us every single sentence that the term appeared in, so that we can now make a decision. It's going to be most likely sample space sheet, 1,317 times it was used that way, and probably bead chip with a capital C in the middle, because we've got 1,238 usages that way. But the customer may say, no, they've all been using bead chip wrong. Bead chip is actually 2 words, and it's a name, and it has a capital C. Okay, well, then we're going to manage it that way. So we're getting to the end, so we have questions. Let's just talk about how you use source terminology once you have it. So you've gone through whatever process you're going to go through to collect your terminology, to validate your terminology, to maintain it. You have a workflow. You've done all this great work, and now people actually are going to use this master set of words that you have given them. There are 2 different ways, and I call them the pull method of using terminology or the push method of using terminology. The pull method of using source terminology has no tools involved, and it goes a little bit like this. I'm a writer, I'm sitting at my desk, the lights are just so, my pencil is sharpened, the music is playing, I got the caution tape across the cubicle walls, I am in the zone, and I am writing, and I come across a word, and I have to decide, gee, I wonder if I care about this word. Is this a word that has any rules around it? So I think maybe, and I have to go and locate that magic list of words, a spreadsheet, a table, someplace. So first I got to find the needle in the haystack, and I go and I look up the term. And if the term is actually in the term list, I check to see whether I used it correctly or not, and I make corrections in the content if I need to. No one does this. The dirty little secret about all that time and money that you spent on your style guide, you spent on your terminology, is that no one has the time to ever look anything up. Because I'm in the zone, and I'm under a deadline, and I didn't memorize the style guide. I looked at it in the first 3 weeks that I was an employee 3 years ago. I don't have the time. Manual terminology management doesn't work. Manual style guide enforcement doesn't work. We mean well. We really mean well. I don't know a single writer, editor, or translator that doesn't want to get it right. But I don't have time to look something up in some spreadsheet because maybe it's going to be there and maybe it's not. Not possible. Instead, you need to use a tool. You need to have a tool that you can look at. You're in your content. You can click a button or it tells you as you're typing, hey, you're not using that term properly. It pushes that content to you. It pushes the changes to you. It pushes the accurate terms to you. The software checks to see if it's being used properly against the term base. And the software says, hey, you use canine, it's supposed to be dog. Here, drop it in. Fast, easy, simple. You can standardize on it. You can enforce it. You can govern it. People can use it. People will learn. You teach people enough times that bead chip is 2 words and they're both capitalized, and guess what? They start writing it that way automatically. So without a tool, you're pulling that information. Painful. Doesn't happen. With a tool, you're pushing it. All right. Terms are words you care about. If you manage them, things will be a whole lot better. If possible, using a tool is a really good idea. And if not, well, at least keep everything up to date as you manage things. And with that, we've got a few minutes left for questions.
All right, awesome. Thanks a lot, Val and David. We have about 5 minutes left. Here's an interesting question. Any good books on this topic? Val, I think you actually wrote a book, right? Why don't you tell us?
Shameless plug. So, well, I just wrote a book called Global Content Strategy, a primer, published by XML Press, came out in September. I talk about terminology management. The Bible of terminology management, though, is a book called The Global English Style Guide, and it is written by John Cole, K-O-H-L, great guy, and SAS Press is the distributor of it. That is the usual Bible that most of us refer to for writing global English.
Okay, awesome. Then, what are the tools that you are recommending?
Well, shameless plug, Content Rules is an authorized reseller and service provider for Acrolinks. So, of course, I'm going to recommend Acrolinks as your terminology management system, particularly for pushing content, pushing changes and corrections to your authors. But there are others. HyperSTE is one. There are a few of them on the market. They each have their own features and do things in different ways. So there's 2 right there for you.
Okay, awesome. Actually, David, I have a question for you on that. how do you handle if somebody doesn't have a tool? What's your approach to terminology management when you translate content?
Well, we also do the dirty method. We use for the interaction and the iterations with the customer. We use Excel spreadsheets, but then we import them into our tool, which is part of the. This is not a shameless plug because I don't care what tool you use, but we use multi-term.
Okay, awesome. Oh, and then I want to mention, Val, both you and I, we're going to talk at Information Development World this, I think it's September 30th through October 2nd in Silicon Valley. Do you want to quickly tell our audience about this, what this conference is about?
The conference is all about creating awesome customer experience through content. So if you're responsible for creating content and creating customer experiences, then exceptional customer experiences through content. We will have a lot of people speaking. It's all been posted. informationdevelopmentworld.com. We have early bird pricing until the end of May. The conference sold out last year. The workshop sold out very quickly. Hope to see you there. It's in San Jose, my backyard. And yes, and I co-host that with Scott Abel, the content wrangler. Many people know Scott.
Yeah, I attended last year. It was awesome, and I'm lucky enough to present this year. And actually, I'm doing a full-day workshop on SEO. That said, let me see. We could just get a bunch more. Do you normally use statistical frequency only to find term candidates? Val.
That's for me or for Val?
Oh, let's start with Val.
Okay.
So harvesting the terminology and aggregating it when we use an automated process is done by statistical frequency. However, that's not the only way to evaluate terms, and it's not the only way to find terms, because there are terms that we can locate and make decisions on based on things other than frequency. So I would say in an automated way, it is the easiest methodology, and it is the most standard methodology. But when you add humans into it, there are additional things that we look for and additional things that we do. So, David, I don't know if your answer is any different.
Okay, so we use a tool called Term Extract, and it's also it's based on statistical frequency. What you can do is you can set the tool to identify, say, terms of a single word, which is almost useless, of course, but up to 3-word terms, and it'll use the statistical frequency to come up with a list of term candidates. After you've done that, then you have to go through it and validate each term separately. This is helpful if your content is very technical, for instance, and you have a huge corpus, for instance. But if you have less than 100,000 words, then I wouldn't use this, not because it doesn't perform, but because we haven't, in our experience, we haven't found it effective for smaller amounts of content.
Great. Maybe one more question here, and Val Pavel sends greetings from St. Petersburg. This question: do you have any overview of trends in enterprise terminology management? Does everything go to the cloud and become browser-based? Are there any cross-platform term management solutions for web, mobile, and desktop?
It's a really good question. I see things going to the cloud, and I think that things will be largely browser-based as we move forward. Some companies are ahead of the curve with that. There's still a lot of on-premise terminology management systems and a lot of companies, using on-premise tools. David, do you have different experience on that?
Obviously, having a tool that's web-based is a huge advantage because your stakeholders aren't sitting in your office anymore. Your stakeholders are all over the world. So that sort of goes without saying. Do I find that I don't see it as a disruptive technology. I think it's just a natural progression. Instead of sending Excels back and forth, there's no.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. That's it. We're 1 minute over. Val, I'm going to ask you and David just one last thought before we end this session here. Any conclusion, last tip?
One last thought is hopefully at this point you guys are all convinced that whether or not you're translating, managing your terms is really important, and it's something that you're going to look into more seriously in the future.
Awesome.
That's my final thought.
David?
Well, I could, anybody who's interested in finding out, the return on investment in managing your terminology, just drop me an email and I'll send some information about that. The ROI is really amazing, especially for companies that are translating.
Awesome. Hey, Val.
Same here. Feel free to reach out to me if I can help too.
Absolutely. Yes, please contact those two. I really enjoyed the session. Great stuff. Thanks again. And thanks again to our audience for your interest. We'll hope to welcome you next time as well. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.